There is a jet flying over your head right now that you cannot see, cannot hear, and cannot track on any civilian radar system. It does not show up on satellite imagery the way conventional aircraft do. It does not announce itself with a sonic boom. It does not leave a trail you can follow. It simply appears where it needs to be, does what it was designed to do, and disappears back into the sky like it was never there at all. And right now, in the most advanced military intelligence bureaus in Beijing, teams of engineers and analysts are spending billions of dollars and thousands of man-hours trying to figure out exactly what it is capable of. Because they know it exists, they just cannot stop it. That jet is the B-21 Raider, and it is not just an aircraft. It is the most expensive, most secretive, most technologically advanced flying machine the United States has ever built. It is a stealth bomber designed to penetrate the most sophisticated air defense networks on the planet, fly undetected into the most denied airspace in the world, and deliver a payload that could end a conflict before the other side even knows the fight has started. The price tag for this program runs into the trillions when you account for the full fleet, the infrastructure, the development costs, and the decades of classified research that made it possible. And every single dollar of that investment is pointed at one specific problem. What do you do when your enemy has built a wall of radar systems, surface-to-air missiles, and electronic warfare capable of shooting down almost anything you send at them? The answer, apparently, is the B-21 Raider. If you are fascinated by military technology and the machinery that keeps the world in balance, subscribe right now so you never miss a story like this one. Because today we are going deep inside the aircraft that is reshaping the balance of power in the Pacific and keeping the generals in Beijing up at night. This is not just a story about a jet. This is a story about the future of warfare itself. Before we talk about what the B-21 Raider actually does, you need to understand why it had to exist in the first place. Because the answer to that question tells you everything about the world we are living in right now. For the better part of 3 decades after the Cold War ended, the United States Air Force operated in an environment of near-total air dominance. When American jets flew, enemy air defenses either did not exist in meaningful numbers, were technologically outmatched, or simply chose not to engage. The Gulf War in 1991 demonstrated this with shocking clarity. Coalition air forces dismantled the Iraqi air defense network in the opening hours of the conflict. American pilots flew where they wanted, when they wanted, with a level of freedom that military planners had never seen in a major conflict. That dominance carried through the campaigns in the Balkans, through Afghanistan, through the Second Gulf War in Iraq. American air power moved like a hammer through adversary airspace because nobody on the other side had the technology to stop it. But something was changing in the background, and the people watching it happen most closely were the strategists and engineers inside the Pentagon. China was watching all of those conflicts very carefully. So was Russia, and what they saw terrified them, not because American air power was unstoppable by nature, but because they had watched the United States expose the blueprint for how to dismantle a modern military in weeks. They took notes, and then they went to work building the antidote. Over the following 2 decades, China in particular embarked on one of the most aggressive military modernization programs in recorded history. They developed and deployed layered integrated air defense systems designed specifically to defeat the kinds of aircraft the United States was flying. These systems combined long-range radar with advanced surface-to-air missiles, electronic warfare capabilities, data links that allowed every node in the network to share information in real time, and command systems sophisticated enough to track and engage multiple targets simultaneously across enormous areas of contested airspace. The system the U.S. military worries about most is what they call the Anti-Access Area Denial Network. The term sounds bureaucratic, but what it means is simple and terrifying. China has built a wall, a vast, layered, overlapping bubble of radar coverage, missile reach, and electronic interference that stretches hundreds of miles out from the Chinese coastline and into the South China Sea and the Western Pacific. Inside that bubble, the rules of air warfare change completely. Aircraft that would fly freely in uncontested airspace suddenly face a lethal environment where radar systems are watching from multiple directions simultaneously, where surface-to-air missiles can reach altitudes and ranges that were science fiction 20 years ago, and where electronic warfare systems can jam communications and disrupt navigation. The aircraft the United States had relied on for decades, the F-15, the F-16, the B-52, even the B-1 Lancer, are not designed to survive inside that kind of environment. They are powerful, capable, extraordinary machines in countless scenarios. But flying them into the heart of a mature Chinese integrated air defense network without any kind of suppression or support is not a plan. It is a eulogy. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber addressed some of this problem. It was the first operational stealth strategic bomber in history, and it represented a genuine revolution in what air power could accomplish. The B-2 could penetrate defended airspace in ways that conventional aircraft simply could not match. Its blended wing body design and radar-absorbing materials made it nearly invisible to the radar systems of its era. It flew its first mission in combat over Serbia in 1999 and demonstrated in real-world conditions what stealth technology could do when it was properly designed and properly employed. But the B-2 was designed in the 1970s and 1980s. Even with continuous upgrades, it was conceived to defeat the air defense systems of the Soviet Union as they existed during that era. The world has not stood still since then. Their surface-to-air missile systems have become more capable. Their ability to detect, track, and engage low observable targets has advanced in ways that would have been difficult to imagine when the B-2 was on the drawing board. And the United States Air Force had another problem beyond technology. They only ever built 21 B-2 Spirits, 21 aircraft to cover every strategic bombing requirement the United States might face anywhere on the planet. One of those aircraft was destroyed in a ground accident in 2008. That left 20 airframes to handle all potential strategic nuclear and conventional bombing missions for the most powerful Air Force in human history. That was never enough, so the Air Force made a decision. They needed a new bomber, not a refurbished, upgraded, stretched version of something old. A clean sheet design built from the ground up with one mission in mind: penetrate the most defended airspace on Earth, survive inside the most lethal integrated air defense environment ever constructed, and deliver decisive firepower with precision. The result is the B-21 Raider. The name itself is deliberate and meaningful. The Raider is named after the Doolittle Raiders, the aviators who launched from an aircraft carrier in April 1942 and struck the Japanese mainland when the entire world thought such an attack was impossible. The symbolism is intentional. This is an aircraft built to do what the enemy believes cannot be done, to go where they are certain no one can go, and strike what they are sure is safe. The development story of the B-21 is unlike almost any other weapons program in American history, and that itself tells you something important about the nature of this aircraft. Most major defense programs in the United States are public knowledge for years before the hardware exists. Congressional testimony reveals budget numbers. Contractor press releases announce milestones. Aviation enthusiasts track test flights and photograph prototypes. The F-35 program, for example, was publicly known, publicly debated, and publicly controversial for decades before the jet entered service. The B-21 was different from the very beginning. The program was managed under a level of classification that kept almost every meaningful detail hidden from public view for years. When the Air Force awarded the development contract to Northrop Grumman in October 2015, they announced the contract itself. They did not announce the price. They did not announce the full scope of the program. They released essentially nothing that would give adversaries meaningful insight into what was being built. What leaked over the following years were fragments, artist renderings that were deliberately vague, budget line items hidden inside classified annexes to defense spending bills, occasional references in congressional testimony that mentioned the program by name without describing capabilities. The aircraft itself was assembled and tested inside facilities at Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale, California, in hangars that were covered against satellite surveillance. The first time the public saw a clear image of the B-21 was December 2, 2022, when Northrop Grumman and the U.S. Air Force unveiled the aircraft at a ceremony in Palmdale. And even then, what was revealed was carefully controlled. The exterior shape was shown, the general configuration was visible, but the details that matter most, the internal systems, the avionics, the the radar cross-section data, the electronic warfare capabilities, the sensor suite, none of that was disclosed. Because none of that will ever be disclosed publicly. That is the nature of this program. What the world saw on December 2nd, 2022, was a glimpse of an aircraft that is in almost every meaningful sense still a secret. So what do we actually know about the B-21 Raider? Let's start with what is visible, and work from there, because even the publicly available information tells a remarkable story. The aircraft is a flying wing design, which means it has no conventional fuselage and no tail surfaces. The entire aircraft is essentially one large wing. This design philosophy was pioneered operationally with the B-2 Spirit, and before that, with experimental aircraft going back to the Northrop YB-49 in the late 1940s. The flying wing configuration is not just aesthetically distinctive, it is fundamentally linked to the aircraft's stealth characteristics. Radar cross-section, the measure of how detectable an object is to radar, is determined by the shape, size, and materials of an aircraft. Conventional aircraft designs with vertical tail fins, fuselage protrusions, engine nacelles, and other geometric features that stick out at angles create multiple surfaces that reflect radar energy back toward the transmitter. The flying wing design minimizes those angles. Almost every surface on a properly designed flying wing presents the radar energy it receives at an angle that deflects it away from the receiver rather than back toward it. Combined with radar-absorbing materials applied to the aircraft's surface and careful management of the aircraft's internal features, this creates an object that returns an extraordinarily small radar signature. How small? The Air Force has never released this number for the B-21, and they will not. For the B-2, the officially described radar cross-section is roughly equivalent to a large bird or a small metal sphere. For the B-21, the publicly available assessments from defense analysts and former officials who have been briefed suggest it is significantly smaller than the B-2. The B-21 was designed with the knowledge of exactly how the adversary's radar systems work. Every frequency band they use, every waveform they employ, every integration technique that makes their networks effective. The design process for the B-21 was not about building a stealthy airplane in general. It was about building an airplane that is stealthy specifically against the threat systems it will actually face. That distinction matters enormously. It means that the engineering choices made in the B-21's design were driven by intelligence assessments of real-world adversary capabilities. The shape of the inlets that feed air to the engines, the way the weapons bay doors are designed to minimize radar return when opened, the materials applied to specific surfaces that are exposed to specific radar bands, all of it was engineered around actual threat data. The aircraft is powered by two General Electric F-118 engines, the same engine family that powers the B-2. These engines were chosen for a combination of performance characteristics, reliability, and their compatibility with the low observable design of the aircraft. Engine inlets and exhausts are among the most radar-reflective parts of any aircraft because they contain the rotating fan blades of the engine itself, which create a distinctive radar return. The B-21's inlet and exhaust designs use carefully engineered geometry and materials to minimize this signature. The aircraft is designed to be operated by a crew of two, a pilot and a co-pilot or mission commander, though the Air Force has also stated that it will have the capability to fly remotely piloted missions without a crew aboard. That capability is significant beyond the obvious tactical flexibility it provides. An aircraft that can be flown without a crew is an aircraft that its operators can risk in scenarios where putting human lives at risk might change the political calculus around a decision to strike. In the most extreme threat environments, where even the B-21's stealth characteristics might not guarantee survival, the option to fly the mission without a crew aboard changes what is possible. The weapons capability of the B-21 is described in general terms publicly, but never in specifics. What the Air Force has confirmed is that the aircraft is designed to carry both conventional and nuclear weapons. It will be capable of delivering the B-61-12 nuclear gravity bomb, the long-range standoff weapon, which is a nuclear-armed cruise missile, and a range of conventional precision-guided munitions. The aircraft's internal weapons bay, which keeps weapons stored inside the fuselage rather than on external pylons where they would compromise the aircraft's radar signature, is large enough to accommodate the full spectrum of current and planned Air Force strike weapons. What the Air Force has been careful not to describe publicly is the full capacity of that bay, the specific combinations of weapons it can carry, or the classified weapons systems that have been developed specifically for this aircraft. Because some of the most important weapons the B-21 will carry have never been publicly acknowledged at all. Now let's talk about the thing that truly separates the B-21 from every bomber that came before it, and the thing that keeps China's air defense planners staring at their screens in the middle of the night. It is not just the stealth. Stealth is table stakes for this aircraft. The thing that makes the B-21 genuinely revolutionary is the degree to which it was designed from the beginning as a networked, connected, sensor-fused combat system rather than just a bomb truck. Previous generations of bombers, even the B-2, were designed primarily as delivery platforms. Their job was to get to a target and drop a weapon on it. The intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance that identified the target happened before the mission. The weapons that would be used were loaded before takeoff. The mission planning was done before the aircraft left the ground. The B-21 is designed to operate in a fundamentally different way. It is built around open systems architecture, which is a technical term that describes a design philosophy where the core platform is built with the ability to rapidly integrate new software, new sensors, and new weapon systems as they are developed. In practical terms, this means the B-21 is not locked into the capabilities it has on its first operational day. As new electronic warfare tools are developed, they can be integrated. As artificial intelligence-driven mission planning systems mature, they can be incorporated. As new standoff weapons with longer range or greater penetrating power become available, the aircraft can carry them. The Air Force has described the B-21 as living in a digital ecosystem. It is connected to space-based sensors, other aircraft, ground networks, and command systems through data links that allow it to receive and transmit targeting information, threat data, and mission updates in near real time. An aircraft that can communicate with intelligence satellites while flying inside denied airspace has capabilities that no previous bomber in history has possessed. Think about what that means in practice. The B-21 does not need to fly to a fixed pre-planned target and drop a weapon that was selected before takeoff. It can receive updated targeting data while it is already inside enemy airspace. It can be redirected mid-mission to respond to emerging targets. It can coordinate with other assets, other aircraft, ships, submarines, ground forces, in ways that previous bombers simply could not. This is not science fiction. The communications and data link systems required to do this exist and are being integrated into the aircraft as part of its core design. The implications for how the aircraft would actually be used in combat are profound. A B-21 mission against a high-value, heavily defended target in 2030 or 2035 would look nothing like a B-2 mission in 1999. The aircraft would be operating as part of an integrated kill chain, linked to sensors it did not carry itself, working in coordination with other platforms it might never be in voice communication with, receiving targeting solutions generated by artificial intelligence systems that are processing information from dozens of sources simultaneously, and prosecuting targets with a precision and adaptability that simply did not exist when the concept of strategic bombing was first developed. The range and endurance of the B-21 are critical to understanding why China is worried. The exact unrefueled range of the aircraft is classified. What the Air Force has stated publicly is that the aircraft is designed for global reach, with the assumption of aerial refueling from tanker aircraft like the KC-46 Pegasus. With air refueling, the aircraft can theoretically fly anywhere on the planet without landing. That is not a metaphor or an approximation. It is a literal statement of what strategic bomber doctrine requires and what the B-21 is designed to provide. Now apply that range to the geographic reality of a potential conflict in the Pacific. The distances involved in any military confrontation between the United States and China are enormous. Taiwan, which sits at the center of the most concerning near-term flashpoint in the Pacific, is approximately 7,000 miles from the continental United States. Japan, where the United States maintains major air bases, is 6,500 miles from the American West Coast. Guam, the closest major U.S. territory to the Western Pacific, is still 1,500 miles from Taiwan. Chinese missile systems, the DF-26 in particular, have a range that puts Guam under threat. That means the traditional model of operating from fixed forward bases has become increasingly dangerous in any scenario involving China. The B-21 changes this calculation. An aircraft with true global reach, flying from bases in the continental United States, or from Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, or from Australia, can reach any target in China without depending on forward bases that might be targeted by ballistic missiles in the opening hours of a conflict. China cannot destroy what it cannot reach, and an aircraft that can strike from ranges and directions that Chinese air defense planners cannot predict or track eliminates the foundational assumption that the A2/AD wall makes Chinese strategic assets safe from air attack. This is precisely why the B-21 represents such a fundamental challenge to Chinese military strategy. Their entire approach to deterring American military power in the Pacific is built on the premise that they can make the cost of intervention prohibitively high by threatening the bases and carriers that American air power depends on. Surface the logic, and the problem becomes clear. China invests in long-range ballistic missiles to threaten American bases. American air power retreats to longer ranges beyond missile reach. Air power at those ranges struggles to penetrate Chinese air defenses. Chinese strategic assets and command infrastructure are safe, but now insert the B-21. It operates from ranges beyond Chinese missile systems. It penetrates Chinese air defenses that would kill conventional aircraft. It can strike targets that Chinese planners believed were safe. Suddenly, the entire A2AD strategy, the wall China spent 20 years and hundreds of billions of dollars building, has a door in it. And the B-21 is the key. Let us talk about the production numbers, because they matter enormously to understanding the strategic impact of this aircraft. The United States Air Force has stated a requirement for at least 100 B-21 Raiders. Some analyses and former officials have suggested the actual requirement could be as high as 145 aircraft, depending on future threat assessments and force structure decisions. Compare that to 20 B-2 Spirits currently in service. Going from 20 stealth bombers to 100 or more does not just multiply American striking power by 5. It fundamentally changes the strategic calculus for every adversary on the planet. 20 B-2s can be tracked in theory. Planners can watch their operating bases, monitor their maintenance schedules, observe their deployment patterns, and develop some sense of where they are and when they might be used. 100 B-21s distributed across multiple bases in the continental United States, operating with the ability to fly any direction to any target with minimal warning, becomes a problem that is qualitatively different from anything that has come before. The sheer volume of the force means that any adversary attempting to neutralize the threat faces a counting problem that cannot be solved. You cannot preemptively strike what you cannot find, and you cannot find 100 aircraft that do not want to be found, operating from bases spread across a continent, maintained in hardened facilities that protect them from anything short of a direct nuclear hit. The cost of the B-21 program is one of the most discussed and controversial aspects of this aircraft among defense analysts and in congressional budget debates. The Air Force has been remarkably disciplined about not releasing detailed cost figures for this program, which itself is unusual in an era when major defense programs are typically subject to intense public scrutiny over budget performance. What has been disclosed in various congressional budget documents and Air Force statements is a target flyaway cost per aircraft of approximately $700 million, with the acknowledgement that this figure assumes the full planned production run of over 100 aircraft. Defense analysts who study these programs closely have pointed out that the true cost per aircraft, when development expenses, infrastructure investments, initial sustainment costs, and classified program elements are factored in, is almost certainly significantly higher. Some estimates place the total program cost, including all of these factors, at numbers that reach into the trillions when projected across the full acquisition and lifecycle timeline. That is not a number that is easy to absorb, trillions of dollars for an aircraft. But consider what that investment is actually buying. It is buying the ability to threaten any target on the planet with a level of precision and penetrability that cannot be countered by any air defense system currently in existence or in development. It is buying the deterrent power that prevents adversaries from making decisions they might otherwise make if they believed American power could not reach them. It is buying the insurance policy that every other element of American military power depends on, because without the ability to strike strategic targets inside defended airspace, every carrier strike group, every ground force, every alliance commitment in the Pacific becomes more vulnerable to coercion. The cost is large. What it would cost to lose the deterrent those aircraft provide is incalculably larger. The first B-21 Raider began flight testing on November 10, 2023, at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The test flight program that followed was described by Air Force officials as proceeding ahead of schedule, which for a program of this complexity and sensitivity is not a phrase you hear often. Flight testing of a new stealth aircraft at the required depth involves not just checking whether the aircraft flies properly, but validating every aspect of the aircraft's low observable performance, its electronic warfare systems, its weapons delivery capabilities, its communication and data link systems, and its maintainability. That last point deserves particular attention because it represents one of the most significant lessons the Air Force learned from the B-2 program. The B-2 Spirit is an extraordinarily capable aircraft. It is also extraordinarily expensive and demanding to maintain. The radar-absorbing coatings on the aircraft's surface are sensitive and require careful application and inspection. The aircraft cannot be exposed to rain in certain conditions without risking damage to its stealth coatings. It requires climate-controlled hangars at every base it operates from. Its maintenance burden per flying hour is among the highest of any aircraft in the U.S. inventory. This created real operational constraints. A fleet of 20 B-2s that requires extensive maintenance infrastructure, climate-controlled facilities at every operating location, and hundreds of maintenance hours per flying hour is a fleet that cannot be surged rapidly or operated from austere forward locations. The Air Force made the B-21 maintainability a top design priority from the beginning. The goal was to create an aircraft that retained the B-2's stealth performance, but dramatically reduced the maintenance burden required to achieve it. The radar-absorbing materials applied to the B-21 are described as representing a generational improvement over those used on the B-2, with better durability, better repairability, and better performance against the full spectrum of threat radar systems. The aircraft's access panels and maintenance points were designed with the maintenance crews in mind, not as an afterthought, but as a fundamental design requirement. Early indications from the test program suggest that these goals are being achieved, though the full picture will only emerge as the aircraft accumulates flight hours and its maintenance profile is fully understood. Now, let's talk about something that is rarely discussed in public reporting about the B-21, but is absolutely central to understanding why this aircraft represents a different kind of threat than anything that has come before it. The question of what happens when stealth is not enough. There are scenarios where even the most advanced stealth aircraft might face environments where the combination of radar sophistication, electronic warfare, and sheer density of defensive systems creates a threat that cannot be ignored simply by being low observable. The designers of the B-21 understood this, and they built the aircraft with what is described in general terms as the ability to operate in either penetrating or standoff modes. In penetrating mode, the aircraft flies deep into defended airspace, relying on its stealth characteristics and electronic warfare systems to avoid detection. In standoff mode, the aircraft launches weapons from a distance, never entering the most heavily defended airspace at all. The long-range standoff weapon, which the B-21 is certified to carry, has a range measured in hundreds of miles. An aircraft carrying that weapon does not need to fly over the target. It needs to fly close enough to launch the weapon, which might be hundreds of miles outside the most lethal ring of the air defense network. The ability to operate in both modes means that the B-21 presents a threat that air defense planners cannot solve with a single defensive concept. If you build your defenses to stop the standoff missile, you may leave gaps that a penetrating aircraft can exploit. If you saturate your airspace with sensors to detect penetrating aircraft, you may still be unable to intercept the standoff missiles launched from beyond your reach. The problem compounds when you consider that the B-21 might be operating alongside other aircraft, some manned and some unmanned, in a coordinated package that stretches the defensive network's capacity to respond in multiple directions simultaneously. The Air Force has been investing heavily in the concept of collaborative combat aircraft, unmanned systems that can fly alongside and in coordination with manned aircraft. While the specific integration of such systems with the B-21 has not been publicly detailed, the general direction of Air Force investment makes clear that the B-21 is envisioned operating not as a lone penetrator, but as the centerpiece of a networked force that includes multiple different types of platforms, some of which will be expendable in ways that crewed aircraft cannot be. The nuclear mission of the B-21 deserves its own focused discussion because it represents the most consequential aspect of this aircraft's strategic role. The United States nuclear deterrent rests on what is called the nuclear triad, land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles in hardened silos in the American heartland, submarine-launched ballistic missiles carried by Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines, and nuclear-armed bombers that can fly with weapons aboard in a visible show of resolve, or be generated rapidly in a crisis. The bomber leg of the triad serves a role that the missiles cannot serve. Ballistic missiles, once launched, cannot be recalled. They are committed. Their launch is an irreversible act. A bomber with nuclear weapons aboard can be launched, fly toward a target, and then be recalled before it releases its weapons. This recallability is not just a technical feature, it is a diplomatic tool of enormous value. In a crisis where the United States wants to signal resolve and capability without crossing the threshold of actual nuclear release, generating and flying nuclear-armed bombers is a message that has been used and understood by adversaries throughout the nuclear age. The B-21 preserves and enhances this capability, where the B-52, which currently carries the airborne leg of the nuclear triad, is a 50-year-old aircraft that cannot penetrate modern air defenses without support. The B-21 can fly the nuclear mission against a peer adversary with actual confidence in its ability to survive and deliver. This is not a theoretical distinction. In a scenario where deterrence has failed and nuclear employment is on the table, the ability of the bomber leg of the triad to actually penetrate adversary airspace matters enormously. An adversary who believes that American nuclear bombers can be shot down before they reach their targets may calculate differently about their own nuclear options than one who knows that B-21s are coming and there is nothing they can do to stop them. The B-21 makes the nuclear triad more credible, more survivable, and more effective as a deterrent. And a more credible deterrent is, paradoxically, a more peaceful one, because it raises the cost of any scenario that might escalate toward nuclear exchange to a level that no rational actor is willing to pay. Let us spend some time on the geography of the Pacific, specifically, because that is where the B-21 matters most in the near and medium term. The South China Sea has been the site of one of the most remarkable military construction projects in recent history. China has taken reefs, shoals, and small islands, many of which were uninhabited and barely above sea level, and built artificial islands with military facilities, runway systems, radar installations, hangar complexes, and surface-to-air missile batteries. These installations project Chinese military power hundreds of miles from the Chinese coastline into waters that multiple other nations claim as their own sovereign territory. The Chinese facilities at Fiery Cross Reef, Subi Reef, and Mischief Reef in the Spratly Islands now have runways capable of operating any aircraft in the Chinese inventory. They have radar systems providing broad air coverage of the surrounding sea lanes. They have missile systems that threaten both aircraft and surface ships in their vicinity. They are, in effect, unsinkable aircraft carriers positioned deep in what China claims as its sovereign waters. Now, these facilities are also targets. In a conflict scenario where the United States needed to neutralize Chinese military power in the South China Sea, these artificial island bases would be among the highest priority targets, and they are well defended by the layered air defense systems that China has installed on and around them. A conventional aircraft attempting to strike these targets would face a layered defense of fighter aircraft operating from the island runways, surface-to-air missile systems, radar networks, and electronic warfare. The losses would be significant. The B-21 changes that calculation. An aircraft that can approach these targets from directions and altitudes that the defense systems are not optimized for, carrying precision weapons that can destroy runways, radar installations, command centers, and missile batteries, presents a threat that the defensive systems on those islands were not designed to stop. And because the B-21 can operate from bases far outside the range of Chinese ballistic missiles, the attack can be launched from a safe distance before the Chinese forces on those islands have any indication that an attack is coming. This is not a scenario that American military planners are eager to discuss in public. It is also not a scenario that is hypothetical. It is exactly the kind of operational problem that the B-21 was designed to solve. The island chain geography of the Western Pacific, the distances involved, the Chinese investment in area denial systems, and the risk to forward-deployed American forces all pointed to the same requirement. You need an aircraft that can reach any target in that theater, penetrate its defenses, and deliver decisive firepower without requiring the forward-basing infrastructure that China's ballistic missile arsenal is designed to hold at risk. Now let's talk about the reaction from China, because it reveals something important about how seriously Beijing takes this threat. Chinese military analysts who write for official and semi-official publications have addressed the B-21 repeatedly since its unveiling. Their assessments are notably less dismissive than the tone Chinese commentary often takes toward American military programs. Typically, Chinese military media is confident, sometimes contemptuous, in its characterization of U.S. weapons programs. The F-35's developmental challenges were covered extensively and gleefully. American aircraft carrier vulnerabilities are a regular topic of satisfied analysis. But the B-21 commentary has a different quality. It is careful, measured, and in some cases, genuinely concerned in tone. Chinese defense analysts have raised specific concerns about the B-21 that reveal what they believe the aircraft's most dangerous characteristics are. First, the range and basing flexibility. Chinese analysts understand that an aircraft capable of global reach, operating from the continental United States, or from Diego Garcia, or from Australia, creates a targeting problem for the People's Liberation Army rocket force that cannot be solved by adding more missiles. You cannot hold at risk what you cannot find, and you cannot find bases in the continental United States with the missile systems that China currently has fielded. Second, the penetration capability against their air defense systems. China has invested heavily in radar systems, electronic intelligence gathering, and counter-stealth technologies, specifically to reduce the effectiveness of American low-observable aircraft. The development of meter-wave radar systems, which operate on frequency bands where smaller stealth aircraft are more detectable, has been a Chinese priority. But there are physical and practical limits to what those systems can do, and the B-21 was designed with knowledge of exactly those systems and their capabilities. Third, and perhaps most concerning to Chinese planners, the number of aircraft. 20 B-2s could be absorbed into Chinese contingency planning as a known, bounded threat. A fleet of 100-plus B-21s cannot be absorbed as a bounded threat. The planning problem becomes open-ended. You cannot defend against what you cannot define, and a stealth bomber force of that size, operating globally, with no fixed operational pattern that can be observed and predicted, defies the kind of systematic threat assessment that drives force planning. There is another dimension to the Chinese concern about the B-21 that goes beyond the hardware itself. It is about what the B-21 represents in terms of American willingness to invest in strategic capability. Defense spending, in a democracy, is a political act. It requires sustained political will, budget discipline, and the ability to maintain classified programs against the constant pressures of transparency demands, competing budget priorities, and the natural tendency of complex bureaucracies to expand, delay, and overspend. The B-21 program has, by the standards of major American defense acquisitions, been remarkably disciplined. The contract was structured in a way that placed financial risk on the contractor, Northrop Grumman, rather than the government. The classified structure of the program protected it from some of the political and bureaucratic forces that have slowed and bloated other programs. The result is an aircraft that appears to be delivering on its performance promises, on a schedule that is tracking reasonably close to original projections, at a cost that, while substantial, has not spiraled out of control in the way that previous programs have. To Chinese analysts watching American defense procurement, this is itself a signal. The United States is capable of building and fielding a world-class stealth bomber more efficiently than it has managed with almost any other major program in a generation. That capability, the organizational and industrial capacity to design, build, and field this kind of aircraft, is itself a form of deterrence. Let us talk about Northrop Grumman for a moment, because the company that built the B-21 is itself a fascinating part of this story. Northrop Grumman is the only company in the world that has ever designed and built an operational stealth strategic bomber. They built the B-2 Spirit. They built the B-21 Raider. This gives them an organizational depth of expertise, accumulated institutional knowledge, cleared workforce, and specialized manufacturing capability that does not exist anywhere else on Earth. The tooling, the facilities, the workforce skills required to build a flying wing stealth bomber at this level of sophistication represent decades of investment that cannot be replicated quickly. The classified manufacturing processes that ensure the B-21's stealth coatings are applied correctly, the precision required to build surfaces accurate to tolerances, measured in fractions of an inch, the testing infrastructure to validate radar cross-section performance, none of that exists anywhere else. When the Air Force awarded the B-21 contract to Northrop Grumman and not to Boeing, which submitted a competing proposal, they were in part acknowledging that the knowledge and capability accumulated in building the B-2 was simply not something that could be transferred to a different company without unacceptable risk. The decision has proven correct. The B-21 has proceeded through development and into flight testing without the catastrophic technical failures that have derailed other programs. That is not luck. It is the result of decades of accumulated expertise being properly applied. The facilities where the B-21 is built, the classified hangars at Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale, are themselves worth a brief discussion. Palmdale has been the home of classified aircraft development programs for decades. The U-2 was tested in the nearby Nevada desert. The SR-71 Blackbird was built and tested in and around this complex. The B-2 was assembled here. The continuity of that industrial base, the ability to maintain cleared workforces, specialized facilities, and the community of contractors and subcontractors that support advanced aerospace programs over generations is itself a strategic asset. The workforce that builds the B-21 includes engineers, machinists, systems integrators, and test personnel who in many cases have spent their entire careers working on classified aircraft programs. Their knowledge is not written in any manual that an adversary could steal. It lives in their hands and their minds, and the collective memory of an organization that has been building these kinds of aircraft for half a century. Let's talk about where the program is going from here, because the first operational B-21s are now a matter of when, not if. The Air Force has stated that initial operational capability, the point at which the first operational unit achieves a basic combat-ready status, is targeted for the mid-2020s. Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, which currently operates the B-1B Lancer fleet, has been designated as the first operational base for the B-21. The choice of Ellsworth is significant on multiple levels. It is located in the American heartland, thousands of miles from any coastline, and well beyond the range of any adversary's conventional strike capabilities. The base already has the infrastructure to support a bomber wing. Its workforce has experience operating and maintaining complex bomber aircraft, and it is positioned to provide rapid response across either the Pacific or Atlantic directions with air refueling support. The transition from B-1B operations to B-21 operations at Ellsworth will be among the most closely watched military transformation events of the coming decade. The B-1B has been the backbone of American conventional bomber capability for 40 years. It is a high-speed, high-payload aircraft that has served in every major American conflict since it reached initial operational capability. But it was not designed for the stealth mission, and in a contested Pacific environment, its survival against modern air defenses is not assured. The B-21 replaces not just the B-1B, but the entire concept of operations that the B-1B represented. Where the B-1B relied on speed and electronic countermeasures to survive, the B-21 relies on invisibility. It is a fundamentally different approach to the problem of getting to a target and coming back alive. Additional bases will follow. The Air Force has discussed Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, which is the current home of the B-2 Spirit, as a likely future B-21 operating location. Dyess Air Force Base in Texas and other installations may follow depending on the final force structure decisions. The broader distribution of B-21s across multiple bases, rather than concentrating them at one or two locations, is itself a strategic decision that increases the aircraft's survivability and complicates adversary planning. 100 aircraft distributed across 5 or 6 bases presents a very different targeting problem than 20 aircraft at 2 bases. Let us zoom out for a moment and think about what the B-21 means for the larger arc of military competition between the United States and China, because that is ultimately the context in which this aircraft will be judged by history. The competition between the United States and China is not simply a military competition. It is a competition across every dimension of national power: economic, technological, diplomatic, and yes, military. But at the foundation of that competition, underlying every trade dispute, every diplomatic confrontation, every technology contest, is a military balance. The question of whether the United States can credibly defend its allies and its interests in the Pacific against Chinese military power. The A2 strategy that China has built over 20 years is designed to make the answer to that question no, to make American military intervention in a Pacific crisis too costly, too uncertain,